there twice for security.
Give it to a 7-year-old who knows how to do digital hand.
All right, I'll try and keep this to an hour because I got a lot of stuff that I could go through in real detail, but I'll try and get through this. So this is a coffee table I built this year. I started it like right after first of the year, and it's a soft maple top, cherry frame, and a curly maple veneer for the sides and the shelf. And I just want to put a plug in to the fellow that designed this original one. His name is Jeffrey Roberts. He's a member of SAPFAM, which I know some people have heard that, the group, Society of American Period Furniture Makers. And that's his website. But if you just want to poke around, I mean, his stuff is mostly 18th century furniture, but his stuff is just unbelievable. So, Frank, what are you going to do here? Just arrow down?
Down, arrow.
Left, right, left, right.
Left, right. This one.
So this is what I saw on his website. So basically that's what I copied, and I just loved his design. This guy is just incredibly talented, and so I sent him an email and I said, hey, I'm interested in building this, not to sell, but just for myself. Could you send me some plans? And he was generous enough to send me a rough sketch, which this is what he sent me. So this got me started, and from here I made a full-size drawing, figured out the angles that I was going to use, and then started building this piece. So what makes it complicated is literally it's almost like a chair, because like this angle here is 7¼ degrees. I don't know if you can see it way in the back. Up here is 5½, and then he gave me basically the dimensions, and I don't remember which it was, but he must have changed it along the way because not all the numbers worked out. But when I made the full-scale drawing, I know. So,
Maybe he just wasn't that excited about his topic.
He wanted to make sure you didn't sell it.
but before I started cutting wood, I figured out where the problem was, which I honestly can't remember right now. And then, so from this, I made the full-size drawing, which you really can't. Because it's so light, I'm realizing you can't really see it. But basically, I just enlarged it full size, and then started figuring out how I was going to do this, and what angles. And the first thing that got a little complicated was, these legs are 12¼ that they started from. But if you just ran it straight down, you'd need like 16¼ So I had to cut a slight angle on the top and a slight angle on the bottom to get it to kind of cant out. So I had to figure that out, and I laid that out, just basically with a square and figured out what that angle was. That was the first thing I did. I cut, my pieces to stock on a table saw, angle in the blade, angle in the miter fence, and then how to get it the same on the bottom, how to be going in the right direction. So I'm gonna, I made a list of things so I can try and follow a sequence, make this a little more. So I'm going to just talk about the wood source first, and then we'll go through the process. So I needed 12¼ cherry for these legs, and I was actually at a Winterthur, so I went to Hearn Hardwoods, and I got the cherry for that. And the other cherry I had from previous projects. The top, I'm going to put a plug in for Aldersford Lumber. They're out in
the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, they're out in the middle of nowhere, probably about as far as Harrisburg. But they have a pretty good online of the different slabs they have. And their prices are very fair when you compare it to a lot of other places. So I was able to, online, basically pick the slab that I got. And this thing was like 8½ foot long. So it was twice what I needed. So I said, hey, can I get a smaller size? And we just worked out a price, which was very fair. He shipped me like a 6-foot piece, and this started with like 2¼ inch stock. So this thing was 6 foot long, like 2¼ and 20 inches wide. I've trimmed the edge off of this. So we're going to talk about how I got this to that. And my router may never be the same. So, and then the light color is all veneered plywood, basically. It's curved, it's bending ply, And as we start talking about the parts, I'll explain a little more about it. So the contrast is just really pretty, and that cherry is going to get darker with age. It's just there's no stain on anything, it's just a natural finish. But cherry just darkens with time, and this hasn't been out of the basement too long, so it's got a ways to go. But if I go back to this first picture, which is really what, I decided that I wanted to try and build this. It just, in my mind, it's just spectacular. And what he did, he carved like a wheat on one end, and can't see any other. There's like a little chameleon or something. So anyway, I just saw this, and I just said, I just want to try and duplicate that. And that's what I do with a lot of pieces. I see something that someone else has designed, and just kind of make copies of it, so you don't have to go through the learning curve of designing something. So before I started this, I really wasn't sure, because honestly, this is almost like building a chair, because you got so much angled joinery. I wasn't really sure the best way to do this. So I asked, a lot of people that I know, and I could kind of bounce ideas off them. And I ended up using a floating tenon for everything. So because of the angled joinery, that's what I ended up doing. And then, so for my full-size drawing, I made templates of most of the important parts, which this is a template of the leg. And the other thing that was really, gotta ask backwards here. The other thing that was really kind of complicated was, once you put this on your blank, and you have to have this sitting at an angle, this has to be parallel to the floor because the stretchers are parallel. And once you start laying this out and cutting the curves, you can kind of lose the registration for where this is. So it took a lot of thinking and mock-ups to try and get that process down. Because ultimately, the joinery needs to all line up, and you don't have a lot of gaps. So I really spent a lot of time initially trying to figure all that out. And then, so I made this template, which I used so much. And this is another one, it's the same thing, but just in...
That's the cross braces one.
Mark, this is Tim.
Yeah,
Top and
no.
bottom. This one.
I think that was the inside of your collar on your new shirt.
Yeah.
Table, this is Mark.
It's gotta be the leg, but I have a smaller one, which I don't know where it is. Anyway, for these kind of pieces in here. So basically, from the drawing, I made the templates and then started making the mock-ups. So the first thing I did was made the four legs, and I'll kind of go through the sequence that I did. So it's almost like cutting up a cabriole leg for anybody that's done it. You start with the square stock, and you draw your pattern on here. You take it over to the bandsaw, saw that one side, take your cut off, tape it or glue it back on, and then flip it over. So you've got something to register on the table saw, on the bandsaw rather. You got to keep it square because it's just really hard unless you had a real big table to kind of steer that around. So as you're cutting the parts off, you're just taping it back on again to make it so you can cut on the bandsaw. And then for the most part, I cut pretty close to the line of a pretty good bandsaw. But the cleanup, I started doing it with spoke shaves, but I've got one of those Black & Decker, just like a random orbital sander, where the belt sander goes up and down, and that really got the roughness from the saw pretty quick. And then I finished up with spoke shaves to try and fair the curve. So I shaped the legs pretty much complete, and then I started working on the joinery. And because now you got, let me just take a step back.
You did the joinery after you did the leg?
Yeah.
After you cut the curves?
Yep. Because there was no way to really lay it out. Because on some things you're cutting a lot of material away. So this is the top here. Yeah. So after I cut those out, now like the face of this has got to be straight. So this has a radius, but then I laid out where that stretcher is going to go, and then I hand plane that flat. So you're working off a flat reference. And for the joinery, I made a lot of these different router template jigs. So what this would do is it would just clamp against the side of this, and you just use the pattern routing bit in the router, and it would sit in here, and you just plunge, an upcut spiral bit. But the location of these was just critical because it had to be in relationship to the stretchers. So when these come together, it's not all mismatched, and that's where I spent a lot of time just trying to make sure my layout was right. So literally I went to the Home Depot and bought a lot of 2x4s. First I burned through the poplar that I had, and poplar's just a lot easier to work with, and these 2x4s from Home Depot are just, it is what you're getting. But I was able to work out the joinery because I didn't want to start cutting into this 12/4 until I figured out exactly what I was going to do, and kind of made these and got the templates figured out to locate where the mortise was going to be. So basically, all the big parts are the same. I think it's 3/8 inch bit. I just made the floating tenons, and I don't know, maybe soft maple or something, and so that worked out really well. It was just really spending time getting this exactly what it was, and I had to keep changing the fences, so it would, my setback would be the same. So I had quite a few of these, really for each joint, keep it, so it would register in the same spot. And then for these, same thing. You just have to work out the registration. So I laid all this out, and then I kind of knew how I was going to go after this. So it took a long time to figure that out before I, had to start cutting this and then putting plugs in because it was in the wrong spot. And it was really critical that it was in the right spot, because if not, if you got a mismatch, you got to clean it up. And the other thing too is these stretchers, these have a slight angle to it too, because this whole thing is splayed. So this has, from the drawing, so the top is 5.5 degrees. So believe it or not, this top stretcher is angled out 5.5 degrees, and the bottom one's 7.5 degrees, or 7 or whatever it is, 7.25. So, it got to be some head scratching. I kind of equate it similar to building a chair. So anyway, but I learned a lot. I learned a lot from the joinery, and the slip tenons that I ended up using really, I think, made it a lot easier.
Could you have used a domino?
Yeah, you probably could, but dominoes are pretty small. Even if you had the big domino machine, not sure, if that would really be strong enough. Although there's a lot, like this table doesn't have to be that strong as long as you're sitting on it.
The biggest ones are 14 millimeters.
Yeah, so it's still pretty small.
They're fatter than yours.
Well, but they're not as long, right?
No.
Yeah.
They're 40 millimeters long.
Okay.
But you still have to register it some way.
Yeah.
And a domino still requires a reference surface that's
Yeah.
Your template, is that the size of your guide?
Yeah. So my guide bearing will exactly fit in here.
Yes, exactly. So how
Yeah.
did you cut that?
I've got that mortise pal. So what you could do is you could just lay this out, and then cut it out on a scroll saw, which one I did that way. Cut it out on a scroll saw, and then sand to the line,
Yeah, that's
or
pretty-
file to the line. But I had that mortise pal.
Okay.
So I have the acrylic template,
Right.
and I was used like a pattern following bit
Okay.
that just kind of matched that.
You can make a template to make the template hole.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Because
It's like
any
time
slop in here is going to make the template not fit right.
Right, that's why it
So-
seems very critical.
Yeah.
If you guys need to make those, actually, doing it on a router table is probably the easiest way to do it. Basically, if you're using a 1/2 inch diameter bushing, you get a 1/2 inch bit, but you can actually plunge a little bit just by registering against.
Drop it on the bit.
router table.
Just drop it
Put
in
stop
there.
blocks, you can do as long or as short as you need.
I mean, you could also do it with the table saw if you were to cut that up into 4 pieces.
You're right, and put ends on
You
it.
know, it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be round on the
Yep.
edges.
Yeah, it
because
just has a
the-
stop.
So I just made a jig also for the chairs I'm building, and what I did is I have a 3/8 bit that I registered both corners of the hole, and then I used dowels for my jig, but then to open up the rest of that mortise for the router, I just kept on plunging on a drill press,
Okay.
and then I cleaned it up with a
Yeah.
with a
Yeah,
chisel.
to the line. Yep.
You know.
Fence on the drill press.
Yeah, so and it's tight.
When I've made them, when I've made the templates, if I need a rectangular hole of any size, I'll take a thin piece of plywood like that, and on a table saw, I'll cut in one direction halfway through, turn it over, rotate it 90 degrees, and then cut the other dimension halfway through, and you get a hole that drops out right in the middle.
Okay.
And that's real easy, because you can set it up for any width and length of wall.
Yeah. So, making this hole is kind of this first part, but then, the referencing leg that's gonna go up against your stock, and then, when you're trying to, plunge this, you have to kind of gang these up together, so this is sitting not just on one thing, so you gotta just kind of gang stuff together. So it just took quite a bit of time trying to figure out how that was, because if these joints aren't tight, it's just going to make the mismatch and everything else. You save so much time by getting the joinery lined up and tight joints. And that's another thing too, just about using the plunge router, because these are pretty deep. I don't know, maybe an inch or a quarter or something. So first thing is, you plunge down all the way to the bottom on the one end, and then move it, plunge all the way to the bottom on the other, and then go back and forth, just taking a little bit at a time. Not a real lot, because this is just a 3/8 inch carbide bit. And if you take too much, that thing will flex a little, and you'll end up with an oversized mortise. So you really do have to be, kind of, take your time on it. It goes fast, but you got to take your time, don't plunge too much at once. Especially on end grain, which is tougher to do. So then you end up with, relatively tight joinery. So, I've heard it's that, you should be able to pick it up, but you can still push it in, so. For the most part, it was actually pretty good.
Mark,
But
do you use a bottom clearing bit?
it was just like a spiral upcut to kind of clear the waste out.
Because I found that if you don't have a bit that cuts all the way to the middle and the bottom, you have to cut back and forth as you're going down.
Yeah, I don't know, it cleared pretty good. I don't have a vacuum on my router. Every once in a while, you gotta take this out and, clean it out. But no, it cleared pretty good. And, if I had another extra $50, I probably would've got the next size router bit. But these carbide ones are expensive, but they do last a long time. So after I did the legs and figured out that, then I'll talk about the stretchers. So, this had to be, set up for mortises. So what I did, I really kept I kept track of everything, what I needed to do. But so basically, it's square stock, but then this is probably the bottom one. This had to be cut on a table saw at 7 1/4 degrees, so it was following the same kind of rake angle as the leg. So I didn't have any extra leg stock, but I had more stretcher stock. But you try not to make more firewood as you're going along here, so, yeah.
So were you able to just dial it in on the table saw and go that way, or were you kind of inching towards it to try to?
For the stretcher lengths?
Cut the angle of the stretcher.
The angle, really, to get.
Yeah, once I figured it out from what I was doing, I just made one pass on a table saw to cut these angles. Yeah.
That was actually easy.
Yeah, it was. And then, then it was really, getting the two mortises lined up as close as I could, so there was minimal cleanup after that. So then, so I finished the legs, and then I worked on the stretchers, all the stretchers. And believe it or not, these little pieces was a real pain in the ass, because the stock I had was not quite wide enough. It should have been like 8 1/4, and I don't know, maybe I had 6 1/4, whatever I had. So I had the same thing. I had to cut the top on a little bit of an angle, going in 2 directions, and the bottom, so it was kind of angled, splayed, so then I could cut the radius out. And it took a long time, even though I cut all these things the same length, it took a long time, like paring away a little, so when that all went together, there was no gaps. I mean, in theory, it should have all been the same, and if it was square stock, it wouldn't have been a problem. But because it was on a slight angle, you know, there was some daylight, so I had to keep sneaking up on it. And because I was doing floating tenons, you know, I was able to move this around a little bit.
Hey, Mark, the lights have a radius, right?
Yeah.
But the stretchers don't follow that radius, they're just straight, so, I mean.
Yeah, so I mean, this radius here,
Right.
so what I did, right, initially I shaped this all on a radius, but then where this goes in, I actually planed like a slight flat.
Okay,
So I had to, you know, kind of remove some material there.
all right.
And that actually, you know, it just was a slow process. I just worked to my layout lines and just set a real fine hand plane, which you guys will be doing in 2 weeks, and just kind of remove that material so it was a flat surface for it to go against. Yeah, so then I got the next thing, the vertical pieces. It just took a while to get that all going in the right direction. And I remember I had to make a little firewood on that because, I don't know, I had, something was going in the wrong direction. You know? Maybe I had 4 on one and 3 of the other. So, honestly, it was a little confusing, you know, at times. So, and keeping track of all the parts too, because even though I tried to make everything exactly the same, I numbered things like A, B, B. So these things were all going back in the same spot. Because if it not, you know, we've been looking for some sawdust and some shellac to fill the gaps.
So do you have masterpieces of all of them, or is it, you were looking at the masters right there?
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's all different stuff that I was doing. You know, here's one of those. Let me get my glasses, see what I wrote on here. It might have been whatever the top angle was. But yeah, no, I had master templates that were, not templates, but ones that I was going to use. You know, it just said set up, right top. I don't know what the angle was. That was like trial and error, trying to figure out, you know, what angle this was going to be at, because it's got to rake this way, and then the bottom has to be that way, but also this way, because it's coming out. So it's a little hard to explain, but you know, I had to follow the same. I have to follow this same angle because it's kind of coming out, and then also coming over because it's following that.
So you really have 2 sets of 4 individual
Yeah.
posts.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, and then, you know, for rounding these, basically the same thing, just a little smaller. Use a probably 1/4 inch router bit, and I made you know, just smaller because I don't have a domino machine. If I had a domino machine, you know, would have saved a little time. But once you make the template, or I might even be able to use that mortise pal, you know, just kind of get that to go in, and that's enough strength because it's just really locating it. There's not much there. So, so then next we'll jump into the 3 plywood panels. The bottom one's real straightforward. You know, just kind of veneered that. So that was a piece of Mr. Kestenbaum's